Time for VUC in our 11th year. With us on our journey this year, Simwood.com. Simwood can turn you as a developer into a telco. Greenfield Tech. Go to greenfield.tech and see how they can make your tech dreams both feasible and affordable. Our conference bridge is the best you'll ever find at zipdx.com. VUC.me is hosted on Bluehost. And our worldwide local rate dial-ins are provided by voxphone.com. All right. Hello, everybody. You have joined VUC674, December 1st, 2017. And before we go any further, let's be very clear. Our guest is Jay Carpenter, and he's going to talk about Desert Blockchain, and we're going to talk a lot about cyber currencies. But before we go any further, very important, don't continue on this without listening to this disclaimer. We have no intention of advising you on investments. When you start to look into, Jay's nodding, when you start to look into Bitcoin and Ethereum and so on, you will see that you have to disclaim saying, we are not advising you. And of course, the VUC, folks, you know the VUC, we are not advising you on any kind of investment strategies. Do not go into this on that light. Do your homework, do what you're going to do. If you're going to invest, fine. But we are not here to talk about investments, okay? We'll mention it, we'll have opinions, we'll have comments on how this stuff is going, but this is not, this is absolutely not advice on investing. That said, I am going to show myself. Oh my God, there he is. And I'm going to show Jay Carpenter. Hey, Jay, thank you very much for joining us.
Hey, Randy. Pleasure to be here.
And Jay's a longtime participant in VUC, and we've been trying to get him to talk about this stuff. We will probably have another session later about more on blockchain. Jay has actually done some things on blockchain already. But today I would really like to talk, for my own needs, by the way, about the basics of cybercurrency. What it means. Is this just some kind of investment scheme, or is it actually, does it serve another purpose? I know some of the answers to the questions we're going to ask, and Corrado and Andy Smith and Michael have questions as well. But Jay, first of all, let us introduce you and talk about what you're doing and what you're doing with Desert Blockchain.
Cool. Thanks, Randy. So I think one of your questions usually starts is, how did you get into this technology field? And way back, I was one of the first purchasers of the PRS-80 Radio Shack personal computer. And I had it in my graduate school dorm room, which was at University of Southern California. And I started tinkering, and that's what got me hooked. I haven't. I've been learning the code for the last couple of years, but primarily, I've been in two sectors over my career. First was in the securities industry, and when I came out of graduate school, I became a very successful securities broker for about 10 years. So, when you state the disclaimer, Randy, I'm very familiar with some of the areas that we have to people know about regarding investments and so forth. And by the way, just so you know, I hold no cryptocurrency at this point. I have been very much interested in the blockchain space for over 3 years now, mostly focused in applications for blockchain, but part and parcel with blockchain is also cryptocurrency, which is like the first killer application of the blockchain. So it's somewhat similar to where email was in the mid-90s. Internet as email, but in fact, the internet was much broader. But today we're going to talk about cryptocurrencies and just kind of do an intro. And I'd like to ask everybody, what questions you have. But the second part of my career was in telecommunications. And I've been very active in the telecommunications industry for, over two decades. And I've been involved with some of the advising committees to the Federal Communications Commission regarding numbering, telephone numbering. And my real interest in this whole space is to participate in a new realm of naming, addressing, numbering, and identity. So that's kind of a little bit about me.
Okay,
so what questions do you have, Randy?
Let me get started, and we will get into all these things, and especially the relation. It's interesting because you're talking about numbering space, naming space, whatever. We get that, and pointers and identity, and blockchain is certainly a major aspect of that. But before we do that, I have a little bit of an idea in my mind of my own newbie travels through this. So the first question, it's not a question actually, it's more like to talk a little bit about how, so there was the blockchain, and that's a technology. Hey, I'm going to put on Michael. We decided we were going to show some of the market capitalizations and hopefully the price. So right now, and because you may follow this over the hour, okay, Bitcoin is at 10,795, Ethereum 480, 460, whatever. It doesn't really matter. The point is, you can look at these. There are places where you can get the graph histories. Jay, I just wanted to ask, I was looking into the difference between the top currencies. The first three that come to my mind would be Bitcoin, Ethereum, and Litecoin, I guess. What else is there out there, and do they matter? And of course, we just had Presscoin on. We've had Library, LBRY on. Those are operating through tokens. We're going to get into what tokens are, but what are the currencies we need to even care about, actually?
So, great question, Randy. First of all, just to talk about the graph or the charts that Michael put up and put things in a little bit of perspective, the total market cap of the cryptocurrencies is about $321 billion, I believe, at the top.
320 billion, 393 million, 563,993 as we speak. Jay, go ahead.
Yeah. So, and just, it wasn't that long ago, maybe a year and a half ago, I think the total market cap was maybe 20 billion.
Right.
So we have seen a tremendous rise, and I believe that 320 billion figure is for the top 100 currencies, but there's probably over 1,000 different, let's call them, or initiatives or enterprises that are out there in this space, and they're coming up as much as, 10s or 20 a day, or they were at least earlier this year. But just to give you a little perspective again, so the market cap of, Bitcoin is about $180 billion. And right now that's about 2 times the market cap of PayPal. That gives you a little bit of perspective. Also, the mining power that's behind Bitcoin far exceeds Google, Amazon, Apple, everything combined. So the computing power that's behind Bitcoin is enormous.
Let me stop you for a second, Jay. Let's talk. Please tell us what mining. I mean, we've all heard about mining, and some people have gotten rich mining, and other people are mining using JavaScript in your browser when you didn't actually ask for anything. What is mining, and how did that all come about? Whatever you want to say about mining, because it's an important term.
So let me put that in the context of your original question, which was what currency should you pay attention to? And in my view, there are 3 basically. And those 3 are Bitcoin, Ethereum, and which the third is not even yet out, which is Filecoin, which is associated with IPFS. Everything else, and this is just Jay's opinion, obviously, but everything else is just noise. So, and I'll tell you why I come to that conclusion. First of all, why is Bitcoin so interesting and so valuable? Bitcoin, in my view, was the first breakthrough in decentralized consensus. So the paper, the famous paper by the pseudonym Satoshi Nakamoto, was basically cobbled together many things that had been around for a long time, but it was really a breakthrough in consensus, decentralized consensus, without a central authority. And that turned out to be a big deal. So, you know, Bitcoin was launched. The first Bitcoin purchase, I think, was 10,000 Bitcoin for a pizza, which would be worth about $110 billion now. Or excuse me, $110 million. And that was about 8 years ago. So that's Bitcoin, a breakthrough in consensus. Was introduced in a white paper, I think at the end of 2014 or beginning of 2014, by a fellow who was 19 years old when he wrote that paper. And Ethereum now has a market cap of what, 42 billion or so. And Ethereum is a breakthrough in decentralized and distributed computation that is governed by a cryptocurrency, which is Ether. So Bitcoin, a breakthrough in consensus, Ethereum, a breakthrough in computation, and now what's brewing is what's called Filecoin, which just had their initial coin offering in August, which was a record offering. And that's a breakthrough in storage. But I think it's even more robust than that. So those are my top three that I would recommend people kind of focus on. And let me stop there and ask you, you know, what other questions do you have?
Hey, quick, okay, and I'm full of questions, and I know other people have questions, so guys, just interrupt if you, or get on IRC or tell me on Wire or whatever. But my other question is, so I've been doing some research and I looked at, for example, Ethereum, and what we would like to know is the differences between these different currencies. But before we do, Ethereum apparently was subject to kind of a holdup at one point. So there's Ethereum Classic, and then there's whatever the new ETH Ethereum is called. And that was basically I'm trying to think of how, not psychological, but an argument between original people and other people who didn't want to modify. Point is, Ethereum, to my understanding, the idea was to bring about change, to invest in certain things. I don't know if you can clarify that, Jay, because I don't know specifics, but I do know, for example, we had Presscoin on last week, and I'm sure I contacted you, and we've even talked about this. Mm-hmm. The idea is that some of these platforms, and this would be the question to answer, some of these platforms are trying to actually affect certain changes or help projects or found operations. Bitcoin seems to be based basically on just payments and making money on mining and so on. So Ethereum took off from that based on, we're going to do such and such a thing. I'm not sure what they were trying to do, but we know what Presscoin is trying to do, which is to help an independent press. We know what library, I know you're familiar with that. You were part of our, you know about what we did with them. They are trying to do creatives. Let's speak a little bit to that if you can. What changes are these different projects trying to make compared to Bitcoin, which doesn't seem to be doing anything in that area? I hope that made sense.
Sure. Bitcoin you could kind of think of as like digital gold. Okay, that's kind of a cliche at this point. I think it's much broader than that, but effectively think of Bitcoin as like a store of value, even though it was originally designed to be sort of a currency for I think it's morphed into basically a store of value with some very, very compelling characteristics. Ethereum, on the other hand, was designed to be this computational innovation. And you can kind of think of Ethereum as like a big Christmas tree that's got all these ornaments on it, like Presscoin, where people are taking the initiative and the foundation and the platform of Ethereum, and they're creating all sorts of novel use cases, like autonomous cars, controlling autonomous cars, like the press coin, and again, I'm not recommending any of these by any means. I'm just sort of describing these different characteristics. But Ethereum was designed to foster these innovations in this decentralized space and to kind of circle. So does that, let me stop there before I get into the DAO, which is what you were talking about from last year.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any questions about that, Randy?
No, I think that's good. I think what's important to understand is, and I think you did a good job on defining the fact that Bitcoin is this gold standard. This is this thing that people are investing in. And we should also mention, as we've talked about before and as I've read today, that China has a big part in Bitcoin, and Bitcoin's ups and downs. Again, Bitcoin, I'm looking at it right now, Bitcoin is up 1,280% from what it was last year. So if you put $100 into Bitcoin, whatever 1,000, you'd have $1,000. Whatever, you'd have 10 times, $1,000 today.
Well,
and I mean that's just one aspect.
About a year and a half ago, just to give you a perspective, a year and a half ago, Bitcoin was trading in the $200 range, and now it's up to almost 11,000. If it's not 11,000 as we're talking,
it's 10,486 right now.
So, okay, so it's when I signed on, it was at 10,800. So it's all over the boards.
Yeah, absolutely.
But, so if you put $200 into Bitcoin last year at one point, or a year and a half ago, then it would be worth 11,000. That's right. That's an amazing return. And what you're seeing now is that's gotten a lot of people's attention. Yesterday in the Wall Street Journal,
big investors. Yeah,
including
huge investors and big groups, right?
Right. In fact, some of the major exchanges have announced that they're going to start trading futures as well as options on Bitcoin. So, it's going to have a full range of financial and derivatives and who knows what. So does that kind of answer your question before we get into the DAO?
Yeah,
if I could jump in for a second, sure. I have a sort of a different sort of a question. That is, it's only worth that much money if you can sell it and get that money out of it, right? So, as an are we talking something that has an economy, or is it just an investment vehicle at this point for most people? Or, for example, VoIP Supply about a year ago said you can buy things with Bitcoin on their website, and I have not encountered that too often. But so, what is the reality of this beyond the theory? Is it usable, or is it just a numbers game right now?
Well, that kind of gets into a bit longer conversation, Michael, about exactly what is money, and exactly what is value. I don't know if you can see this that I'm holding up, but this is my cell phone or my smartphone, and consider this as not only a communications device, but it's also a computer. And basically what you're seeing in these cryptocurrencies is a merging of money and this whole construct of communications, networking, value, all sorts of things. So I don't know if that, it doesn't directly answer your question, but let's suffice it to say that as long as somebody else is willing to pay $10,000 or $11,000 per Bitcoin, that's what it's worth.
And the question I guess I have is the utility of the thing, right?
Yeah. Okay. So the utility is there's two parts to the utility in this whole realm. Number one is some sort of store of value, sort of like gold. And number two, what you're talking about is there any way that this thing has internal earnings, sort of like a company?
Does it tie to
So,
commerce?
yeah, as a form of commerce. And anyway, the Bitcoin itself, probably no, other than from a mining standpoint, if you had the computing power to do mining, then you could create some sort of like consistent earnings, fall into the traditional earnings model. Because every 10 minutes, somebody's earning about, I think, $125,000 by mining Bitcoin. And maybe it's a little bit more than that. Whatever, you know, $10,400 is times 12.5. That's what somebody is earning by mining.
We didn't get into mining, by the way.
Yeah, exactly,
We
Jay.
need to get into mining.
If you
okay, but
for the layman terms, what mining is, please.
Okay. So
I'm sorry for interfering before, because I was actually very interested in the previous subject, if that's okay.
Okay.
Yeah, we need to see you, though, Diana. We don't see you. How come?
I apologize. So here's the story. The economy studies the economical exchanges between people. Whatever currency you want to use, it can be gold, it can be money, it can be bitcoins, it can be anything you want. It just doesn't fucking matter. It's just an easy way to do basically an exchange of goods between different people that are actually producing them. Or whatever exchange you want to have for their work, or whatever you think that the thing that are giving you values in whatever currency you want. Bitcoin is as valid as a currency as anything else, as the gold or anything else. And that's the basis of what they actually teach you when you go into the economy school. And frankly, I don't think the bankers or anyone else actually give a fuck if it is Bitcoin or oil or gold or whatever. It just doesn't matter. The only thing that actually changes the value of a currency is how much you can actually produce of that. Like, for example, in the case of gold, you can actually physically mine it in a mine. In the case of Bitcoin, you can with more and more effort, you can actually mine it digitally. That was the whole point. Now, when it comes down to exchange, you're going to see more and more exchange. It doesn't, because in the end, people don't really care which kind of currency they use to exchange values. That's what it comes down to.
Agreed. I agree. And let me kind of take your point, Diana, and kind of expand upon it. Circles back to what Michael's question is, if I'm hearing Michael correctly. But so, you know, what is value? And part of getting your arms around this whole space is it starts to challenge our whole notion about money and value and currency and exchange and so forth. So to get back to Michael's point and to kind of continue to emphasize your point, Diana, this is a Starbucks rewards card, okay? And this is a local theater rewards or gift card. And this is a Subway sandwich card. Are these money? Well, I would assert that they are a form of value for sure. And basically, if you took all these little cards and throw in your frequent flyer miles and your rewards points and whatever, and you kind of put it into a basket like this, you would have something that starts to look like a cryptocurrency, a fungible method of exchange. And is there a central authority behind that bucket or basket of value? No. What there is that we trust to be around, that Subway is going to be around, that, you know, Southwest Airlines is going to be around. So the notion of currency and value and what's behind it, what's supporting it, starts to blend together, and we start to see this notion of money and trust and value become simply agreement. And it's based on a level of trust that that value is going to be there for some period in the future. Does that answer?
May I just interfere
Sure.
knowingly and say that when it comes down to gold, for example, it's not just agreement. our view about currency has dramatically changed in 1970s when dollar has actually disconnected from gold, and that changed the value of currency from being gold oriented to being trust oriented, basically. And all of us here has actually grow up in a world where the currency doesn't have a value through himself, like gold used to have, but a value based on trust. Now, the Starbucks card, it's, yes, a trust-based currency as well, but it's a trust-based currency as much as the dollar. It's a dollar or euros or whatever, it's a trust-based currency.
You know, it's interesting, Jay, that you mentioned the Starbucks card, because there was when we lived in Paris, there was a copying center, you know, like I can't think of the name of that now, and Kinko's like that kind of thing. And you got a better price when they sold cards. And this is the one time in my life I bought one of those cards and they went out of business. And it's a little bit different because the Starbucks card is not as good an example as what I just said, because the Starbucks card, it's just bonus points. You know, this is something invented by MBAs. Supermarkets use it, and they're mining your ID stuff, by the way, your address and all of that. Whereas I bought, what could have been Bitcoin, but happened to be copies, you know, the right to copy. And then these folks went out of business. Here we have this card that's worthless. So it wasn't a bonus, it was a purchase. And if you buy Bitcoin, or if you buy Ethereum or Litecoin or any of the coins, and anything happens, there's just no guarantee. Again, I repeat, don't do this if you can't lose the money. Don't do it as an investment if you can't lose the money, because you're very likely to lose it unless you know what you're doing. Anyway.
Let me step back,
sure,
Randy, and kind of talk about the overall context, because I think we're starting to kind of, you know, touch on different dimensions of this thing. And let me put two things in the context of the VUC. We have already been through a similar phenomenon. Back in the mid-90s, when all of a sudden this email thing came along, as networks came along, you know, prior to the mid-90s, we thought that a telephone call was pretty distinct from a radio transmission or a television transmission. They were very items. And then the internet came along, and all of a sudden, all these things started to kind of morph together and blend together. That's what we're seeing with this phenomenon that we've, poorly labeled as cryptocurrency and blockchain. This is a much larger phenomenon where, technology, business models, and policy are all starting to morph together. That's why we're kind of wrestling around with this idea of, what's behind it. Can it be used for earnings? Can it be used for value? And the answer is yes. There's nothing behind it other than our trust and our agreement, and the Constitution that was laid out in basically a 9-page white paper by Satoshi Nakamoto. And so it's because we believe in two things, basically, which is the peer-to-peer network that's behind Bitcoin and the cryptography that's behind, that secures. So anyway, so that's my little rant. I do have another piece, which is we're talking about, exchanges of value. The fact is that in like Africa, broadband has been a form of currency. So people have traded their minutes on their cellular services as a form of currency. So this is not entirely foreign. Humans have acted in the past. Okay.
Absolutely. I'm reacting to. So the film strip is visible, folks. We usually don't do that when there's this primary speaker, but because everybody has their piece to say. We're all visible. Corrado, do you or anybody else have any questions? Because I have a million things to say, but I'd rather not monopolize, believe it or not.
I still, as a noob, as a complete newbie of the thing, don't understand what is mining.
Okay. Okay. Would you like me to talk about mining for a little bit?
A piece of value that has a value from nothing, just computational power.
Yeah, Jay, talk about, because we know about the current scams with mining and browser, JavaScript and all that. But in the beginning, there was mining, and we have somebody who used to be a regular on VUC who actually, well, Diane also wants to answer, but you can take turns. So,
well, let's let Diane
the early part
take that.
Yeah. All right, Diana. So the early part of
mining.
Mining.
What's the value of gold, for example? Is the fact that someone actually went down and digged for it, right? Now, if someone actually goes ahead and paid the electricity...
If you allow me, Diana, is the rarity of gold. How rare is gold and how difficult it is to extract. But that is a physical item that has characteristics that are used in many different fields, including electronics, including many other applications. What is a Bitcoin? Physically, it doesn't exist.
What I can tell you is this: the value of gold, for example, is not the gold himself, but the fact that someone actually went ahead and put the energy to go to extract it from the earth. Okay, whatever that effort is. It can be like...
wait, Diana, that's not true. Gold, and what Corrado just said is that gold has an actual use. It's a substance, it's a value. Plus, you have to either pan for it in a stream or mine it in a very costly fashion.
But its use as an industry is incidental to its use as a fiat currency.
Yeah, that's true, but when you actually use it as a currency, you don't actually turn it into the industry. You just don't.
No.
Yeah. The thing the thing is, outside, somewhere around the end of the 15th century, they actually invented a bank ticket, which is basically, before we had money, we had bank tickets that will actually allow you to move money from one bank subsidiary to another. Now, what did the bank ticket actually had as a value? Just the trust in the bank. When you actually use something as a currency, it can be gold or anything else. It's completely different than when you use exactly the same thing as just an intermediary thing. Of course, when I go to actually pay with the dollars, that can theoretically be transformed into gold, because we agreed that on 1970s, we separated the dollars from the gold. I can transform them into some form of a gold and then go and use the gold in the industry. Okay? Dollars or any other currency right now is not actually connected to a physical value. So the value that you actually think the gold has is the value of extracting the gold. The same applies to Bitcoins. When you have the Bitcoin, you have a certain effort to extract. That's the way the Bitcoin was built in the first place. You have an effort to do the mining. It's an artificial scarcity. In the case of the gold, you have a natural scarcity. But it's irrelevant if it's natural or artificial, it's still scarcity. And basically that's what it gives the value.
It's true. It's true. And if I can just interject a quick thing, it's true that if you take a dollar, the dollar is not really backed by gold anymore since whatever year that was. So it's all fictitious. It's all fictitious anyway, and I assume it's true of all the currencies. So we're really talking about labels anyway. It's one of Corrado's favorite subjects. But the point is,
well, let's
none of it has any value. You want to go that way?
Let's get to something a little more fundamental, and also that's related to the technology side of the VUC, which is a big challenge in a computer network, when you've got a peer-to-peer distributed computer network, finding consensus on what the truth is. Because you might have something that changes off in one part of the network, reach the other part of the network for some time. So if you're familiar with computer networking, then you might be familiar with something called Paxos, which is a method of determining consensus. But it's a method of determining consensus that relies on sort of a trusted club, somewhat akin to authorities, where you've got this club of trust that you're gonna rely on this group of trusted folk to vote or you know, attest to authenticity or whatever. Of the innovation of Bitcoin is it replaced this mining competition as a way to sort of elect a leader to determine trust and truth. And that opened up a huge adversarial model instead of a model of networking and determining state. That is huge. And we could probably have a whole hour topic on that. But Corrado, to get back to your point, is the mining is an integral part of the fabric of the technology and the data integrity of the Bitcoin ecosystem.
Yeah,
and the mining is basically a competition to solve a mathematical question.
I want to back up for just a second, and hopefully this doesn't interrupt your train of thought, Corrado. We need to actually look at how the process works for a second. I think mining is a part of this. So if because you have an exchange, which is basically a bank that buys and sells, they can do US dollars or whatever your currency is, and you turn that into, let's just say Bitcoin, because it's the easiest and most impressive thing going on right now, but they can do a lot of currencies. So I go to the exchange and I buy, say, $100 of Bitcoin. If I want to send that to somebody, then what happens is you also have a wallet, and we need to talk about that, by the way, too. So you have the exchange where you buy it, then it's there. Well, the exchange can sort of be your wallet. It's like a bank with a deposit. As far as what I read today, it's not a good idea to leave it at the exchange, but have a wallet. So you've got your wallet. The mining happens when you're transmitting it. Am I right? So part of mining is you transmitting when you make a purchase, or I send you $100 because you're such a great guest. Send you $100 of Bitcoin.
How is 250, please?
All right. You're terrible, very bad on the negotiation, because I was prepared to go up to 5. But what happens? Let's talk about that. You could, for example, send me a request, or I could just decide I'm going to send you from in my wallet or from the exchange, sending you the Bitcoin. What happens actually when we do that?
So basically what happens is, let's say you're sending me $100, and let's back up just a little bit and let me see if I can cast what's going on in something that's a little bit more familiar, okay? Think of this more like giving somebody the password to your bank account, okay? So let's assume, Randy, that you have an account with, I don't know what's over there in France, but let's say it's the Bank of France, for lack of a better term. You've got a bank account with a bank in France with $100 in it. Now, part and parcel with that bank account is a bank account number, right? And also, if you want to access that $100, you need a password, which is sort of like your private key. Public keys, and we've got private keys. The public keys correspond to a bank account number, and the private keys are sort of, and this isn't technically accurate, but sort of like a your password to your bank account. So if you wanted to pay me that $100 that's sitting in a bank account, you might simply give me your password. And then I could change that password, and then I have control of that $100 bank account. Something
that's not going to happen, Jay.
I know. I'm holding out for 500 now, Randy, that you up my negotiating skills. But anyway, so that's kind of the easiest way, I think, to think about the cryptocurrencies. Is you've got this account number, which is like a public key, and then you get this private key, which is like a password. And then
isn't this the public key right here? I'm going to have it on long enough nobody can actually see it, but
correct.
That's the public key.
Correct.
That's your public key, sort of.
That's like your public key, yes. And then
so I can give so you give me your public key, Jay, the equivalent of that, and I can transfer by electronic transfer or bill pay or whatever the banks do nowadays. There's no danger. If I give you that number, actually, you can't drain my bank account, but you have a number that you can pay me, basically. That's the way that works. And I think addresses for your wallet, by the way, that's exactly the same thing, isn't it?
It's very similar. Yep. I mean, look at, you could consider like an email account or an email address as like a public key when we're exchanging money via PayPal or whatever.
True.
It's an identifier. So let's get back to your mining question. What happens there? Well, part of mining, in addition to ensuring the data integrity and serial competition, is assuring that that Randy's not giving out the same password to somebody else with the promise of turning over the $100 account to them, which is called a double spend. So that are doing these, extensive calculations as fast as possible are partly ensuring the integrity of the system, that there isn't a double spend going on. And for doing all those calculations, which are consuming enormous amounts of electricity and ensuring the integrity of the system, they are rewarded this mining reward of right now 12.5 Bitcoin every 10 minutes. Plus, there's also some transaction fees. The mining reward of 12.5 Bitcoin, if you can solve that puzzle within 10 minutes, the puzzle, and therefore determine the block and assure that people aren't double spending, that 12.5 Bitcoin miners, but it also starts to build the currency. So currently there's about 16 million Bitcoins out there, and it's on a fixed scale. But that also is sort of propagating Bitcoin as an item out there. Does that make sense, Corrado? Does that start to make sense?
Yes. I watched a few videos, very quick videos today, just to prepare for the show. Something I usually don't do. Yeah. But I've read and I've listened that there's been a fork of Bitcoin from classic Bitcoin to Bitcoin Cash. And Bitcoin Cash is easier to mine and more stable. So basically, mining is nothing else than exercising control on the blockchain. Am I correct?
Well, it's not really let's hope it's not exercising control on the blockchain. Let's hope that it's ensuring the data integrity and the use of the whole ecosystem. Let's put it that way.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
So, yeah. So there is a difference between the original Bitcoin and Bitcoin Cash, or are they one and the same, brother of the same mother? What is it?
Well, there was a fork, and again, I'm not an expert on the forks, and each one of these cryptocurrencies actually becomes like a study in itself. So that you could spend your full time on just studying the ins and outs of Bitcoin or Ethereum or any of the others. But yes, there are two versions now of Bitcoin, at least two versions, and there's at least two versions of Ethereum as well. And there's the prospect that there will be additional versions that come along. So anyway, and they each have different characteristics. You might think of them sort of like a nation. So when the South wanted to, what's the term, secede from the Union, that could have been considered like a fork. And you would have this. You would have two countries instead of one, but they both emanated from the same. Does that make sense?
I think there might be a whole bunch of forks too. I was just listening to a thing about Zcash, and they forked from Bitcoin. Are you familiar with that? So they're probably not the only ones. And then they select certain updates. We have Rule with us, by the way. Rule, if you want. I don't know if you're ready to get in on the fray or not. Michael asked if, Jay, you were losing some packets, and I lost you, but I didn't say anything because I wasn't sure if everybody else did, but apparently he did too. So yes, Corrado, everybody's chiming in. These things happen. It's the Bitcoin changing price, and people are losing their packets of money, and in this case, data. Anyway, Rule, comments, because you're with us while you're here. You have to unmute.
I don't have anything at the moment, really.
Okay. Well, don't hesitate to jump in. I'm happy to have you.
All right.
Rule's a long time. Haven't seen him in a while, but he's been around for a few years. Mining. Okay, so mining also has to do with CPU. And again, very recently, there's been a big kind of scandalous thing coming out. The last thing I saw today, Jay, I don't know if you even saw this because I think it just came out today, was that they can now, somebody has found a way to have the mining thing going on your computer even after you close the browser window. I guess they open another window that you can't see. It's not literally, they couldn't do that. So people are using your computer basically and I mean, when I go to lunch, my computer's on. I'm sure I'm not the only person on the planet who does that, right? So your computer's on, and if this was going on, somebody would be using your CPU and your bandwidth to make money. So that's an interesting mining. It's not a wonderful thing to brag about, but it's an interesting facet of mining that is reality.
Well, I think, Randy, what it brings up is the game theory and the incentives that are baked into this whole thing. Is there is incentive for people to commandeer computer resources for financial gain via, be it Bitcoin, Ethereum, Litecoin, whatever. So there's a whole game theory involved in this thing, where not only game theory to commandeer computer resources, but also in cybersecurity, because now we've seen cybersecurity ransoms being, proliferated and rewarded via cryptocurrency. So there's a whole cybersecurity dimension to this whole thing that's happening.
There's another aspect I want to mention briefly, by the way, which was that I was on a Slack. I think it was for library, lbry.io. And there suddenly was a flood of messages from all kinds of people with links to click. And apparently, you must know about this, Jay, that for Ethereum, there's a very simple way, the phishing, where you just send a link to somebody, and if they click on it, you have their wallet, you have everything they have. So for people, I mean, if you did that for me, you'd have like $23. But some people may have thousands of dollars, and apparently this is something you want to be aware of. And again, we're not suggesting you invest, but if you do invest, you better pay attention to what you're doing, because that's one thing. I don't know about, I think this is specific to Ethereum, and I don't know why. but it's something you want to be very, very aware of. There's a thing called my Ethereum, my Ether wallet, sorry, is pretty well known. And when you go to that site, they will say immediately, there's a whole long thing you should go through that explains this in the simplest terms. Go ahead, Jay.
So yes, there's numerous ways to lose cryptocurrency. And this is actually one of the areas that I think is ripe for innovation, is to add sort of a human-friendly piece to this whole thing. Because there is no customer service number you can call up if you lose your Bitcoin. You're done, basically, unless you've got like a multi-signature arrangement set up. But just within, I think, the last 30 days, maybe 60 days, you know, there was like a $300 million mistake in the Ethereum network. Inadvertently coded something wrong, and poof, dollars just vanished. And they were talking about doing a fork to rectify that, but without, you know, doing a fork of the Ethereum blockchain, that apparently is just gone. So anyway, so does that answer your question about?
Yeah, totally. There was a big hack of I read about, but don't know the details. There was apparently this big hack of Ethereum, and this must have gone back a year or two, that caused the fork from Ether Classic to Ethereum, whatever it is now.
Right. But let's talk about something that's a little more germane to the VUC, which is many, or excuse me, maybe not many, but some of these, let's say, private key breaches are happening via a, let's say, unauthorized porting of telephone numbers. So the ecosystem, some of the folks in the ecosystem have figured out to successfully port a cell phone number. And when they do that, they can basically change passwords to email accounts. They can get all kinds of access to, you know, the cryptocurrency exchanges and so forth. Very knowledgeable people in this space have lost significant amounts of cryptocurrency via the porting of a telephone number without their knowledge.
Let's go much lower tech. Somebody steals or you lose your phone. If you've got a Bitcoin wallet on it, that's it. You're sunk, basically, because they can pay anybody, unless you've taken, you know, major precautions. A lot of the wallets, I mean, they will tell you as a disclaimer, you better protect your thing and do a backup and blah, blah, blah. But the fact is, you bring up unless there's some, now the one I have, come to think of it, I don't think there's even a you just start it and it'll do whatever you want. There is no password on it. There's a password, ironically, on the backup for some reason, but no password on if I wanted to trade, if I pick up my phone, so somebody picks up my phone in the bar, they bring up the Bitcoin app. I flashed it up there quickly so nobody. And the you know, the $5 or whatever it is that I've got in there, as far as I can see, if I want to send coins, I hit send coins. I don't hear it. There's no password or anything. I just put an address in. So if I had thousands of dollars and you got my phone, that's the end. Hopefully there's better apps than that, actually. But even so, I mean, you know.
That isn't true of everything that is making up with money and not protected properly, but it's your duty to protect yourself.
It's certainly true. It's certainly true of anything to do with your phone. To tell you the truth, the phone is the most horrible invention as far as security. Is the physical, you know, because few people are going to break into your home and get your computer. So, you know, I, for example, don't log in with a password. I'm sure a lot of you don't either at home. You know, it's unlikely that people are going to be in your home.
How many of you have one of these with contactless that you can spend up to £30 with just waving that in front of the
right.
cash.
Exactly. Good point. Good point. Anyway, the phone is the most dangerous thing that we have in our civilization today, really. If you keep valuable stuff, go ahead.
The good news is that cryptocurrency is very easy to transfer. The bad news is that cryptocurrency is very easy to transfer. And by the way, in the realm of the VUC and this community, I think that's one of the areas that's ripest for innovation is how do you put in safeguards that, you know, leverage and optimize the convenience of this thing and the fluid nature of it. How do you put that in that also can optimize some safeguards and some human frailties that we all face, basically?
One thing you can do with Bitcoin, actually, it kind of takes it's kind of a hassle, but you can actually convert it to what they call cold storage, where you take, I'm not very familiar with it, I've never done it myself, but you can actually transfer it to paper as a QR code or as the key, the numbers, and store it on paper and store it in a safe. And once you do that, it's kind of like it's removed from the blockchain, unspendable, without those codes being put back into the system.
That's a great point, and
Useful
that's absolutely right.
Thing
that's
it's possible to safeguard, you know, Bitcoin if you have a large amount or something in it. You don't need it to be liquid at the time.
And some people are innovating with hardware token containers or, you know, private key containers. Yeah. Like, you know, well, I don't have any, but you can imagine something like a YubiKey being your container for your private keys. So.
Well, for this session, we should probably wind it up, but I think we have material for 2 or 3 more. We have covered the basics. I'm pleased that we were able to go through some of the basics. The one thing that we didn't talk about, and maybe just a couple of very quick comments, are the impression that the public has about, particularly about Bitcoin and the dark web and hiring hitmen and stuff like that. This has got to be like 0.001%, I'm guessing, of what's going on. But it is a reality, and the other reality is that somebody, if not multiple people, have tried to hire hitmen and use Bitcoin and found they were talking to the FBI and so on. But there is illicit activity. I think that Bitcoin and the whole cyber currency thing, I believe, has kind of a bad name and a misunderstanding on that level. Does anybody agree or disagree with me on that? I think there's a false impression there, don't you, Jay?
I think it's starting to go away a little bit as more people get familiar with Bitcoin.
Right.
It's still there, but, you know, if you really think about it, there's a lot more bad stuff going on than Bitcoin probably, you know, so.
Right.
I think that'll just kind of
I would agree. I think anytime you face an innovation this profound, there's all sorts of resistance and there's all sorts of demons that are unleashed. I mean, we saw it with the internet. We saw it with VCRs, basically, where, you know, there were some use cases that, you know, people frowned upon, let's say. So I think we're seeing that in some of this dark web stuff and the ransomware around cybersecurity. All of these are places for innovation to take place and for some of these issues to be smoothed out. But what we are seeing, especially with this phenomenal rise in the price of these cryptocurrencies, is it's gaining the attention of the mainstream. You know, yesterday Bitcoin was front and center on the Wall Street Journal, and about somebody in Las Vegas introduced their grandmother to Bitcoin, which she initially thought was called Big Coin. She didn't quite understand it, but once she bought some and started to see the price and she had skin in the game, all of a sudden she learned pretty fast. in terms of what this is, how it can be used, and so forth. So that's kind of my closing advice to everybody. Not a recommendation or anything, but it's just like anything else. You're going to learn it if it means something to you and if you've got some skin in the game. So I highly, highly recommend you start out small if you put your toe in the water on this thing. But I think it is worth your time to start to look at it, and we're just in the very beginning stages of this making a difference for human being.
And anything that all the governments all over the world are afraid of is probably something you want to look into. Who else has some final comments? Anybody?
If I wasn't too imposing today, cryptocurrencies that are completely detached from governments and local banks and national banks are probably prodromic to see one of my theories up pie in the sky, a government for internet, completely separated from countries, that is overarching the whole planet. Another observation, if I can, however, the sector doesn't help itself using terms like mining that bring back memories of the far west, and that is something that it's scaring people instead of taking them in. Last point, I've read again today that there are exchanges that are closing down, and if you have about 30 days to take out your currency, your cryptocurrency, and it's a very short time frame. If you don't do that, they will give the remaining currency deposits to the state of Georgia, one of those exchanges. So you have to be on the game, absolutely on it, 24/7 if you are investing, if you are working with cryptocurrency. That's my recommendation.
Good point. Is unlike a bank, you need to watch this stuff and be aware of it. By the way, I have a bank account that had $5 in it in like 1970, and I tried to contact the bank, and I talked to several people on the phone, but the bank had been bought, and then the other bank had been bought, and so on, and there was nothing they could do for me, although that was worth about, no, so it wasn't a fortune, it was maybe $250 today, but even with no interest, I mean, just the currency value. But the point is, I never was able to unlock it. I'm sorry, Corrado?
Yeah, I think it's a term that the banking industry uses. It's being grandfathered, so it's being taken away. And
I'm the only one. Is it me? Could be.
I think it's you, Randy. I can hear Corrado fine.
It is me.
Before we go away, I just want to say that there is still a serious problem with Bitcoin. Yep, which is very much related to the way the blockchain actually works. And that was actually pointed out by my partner, Paul, which you guys had him here a few times. And the problem with that is that with every new transaction, with every new wallet, the number of transactions increases, and at some point it's going to be exponential. So the computing power of actually doing a transaction, it's increasing, and that's going to be a real problem.
Agreed, Diana. And we could talk about, in my view, everything that's out there right now is a prototype. So there's plenty of space for innovation. Exciting things I think about the VUC community is that this community has a lot of experience in innovation and this area. And I think if the attention starts to get focused on the cryptocurrency and blockchain space, the VUC community, I think it's a realm that's ripe for innovation by this community. So that's what I'll close on today.
So frankly, the reason why I actually care about this, which is very odd, but it's since I'm so money oriented, is because think about all the clearing houses, which are basically businesses that are exchanging money between telephony providers all around the world. So for example, you have AT&T changing just a few minutes with Vodafone in Kenya. Then they actually use an intermediary to exchange money, which is actually the clearinghouse business. And think about how much more easier that will be with Bitcoins.
Absolutely.
Okay.
So I hope this was helpful, Randy.
Yeah, and I lost audio, so I missed out on the last part. But the point is, anyway, that I want to thank you, Jay, and let's remind people of the URL, which is...
Sure, it's desertblockchain.com. And that's just a community building, labor of love for me to build community. And, much like the VUC is for you, Randy, it's not a moneymaker or anything else. I'm not on here today to make money or sell a product or whatever, push any particular cryptocurrency. I'm here because I'm really, really excited about this. And I think we're right on the cusp of some major that could benefit everybody. So.
Well, it's going to be interesting. It's an interesting space to watch. I'd like to recommend a podcast I've been listening to, by the way, called Steal This Show. If you're not familiar with it, Jamie King, we had him on a while back, and he talks a lot about, he talks to people who are the movers and shakers, as they say, in this industry and these projects. And it's a very, very interesting podcast. He's doing a lot of interesting things, including this LBRY library that we had on. And Jamie's, I keep begging him to come back on because he knows a lot about all of these things. Anyway, we need to run because I don't know what I missed, but we're not recording anymore. So you have to watch the YouTube to get the full thing. Diana, thank you for joining us. She was our special secret guest. And of course, Jay, Corrado, Andy, Michael, and Ruel, who we haven't seen in months. Ruel, thank you. All right, I'm going to cut it off. We will be now on the mature audiences only segment.